My wife and her mother wanted to frame me for adultery in order to take away my property and live with her new boyfriend. I walked into a bar and saw my wife with the woman who'd secretly snapped a selfie with me days before. She screamed I was a cheater, raved about her new boyfriend, and my wife smirked like it was planned. Then it hit me. They were framing me to take everything. It started on a day off when I went to a bar with friends. We grabbed a table near the back, ordered beers, and settled in. A woman with dark hair walked up to me. She had a big smile, asked my name, where I worked, if I came there often. I told her I was married and not interested. She didn't back off, kept talking, saying I looked like someone she knew, laughing too loud. I turned away to focus on my friends. She pulled out her phone, said she wanted a selfie for fun, and snapped it before I could push her away. I told her to delete it, but she laughed, posted it on Instagram, and tagged me. I checked later, caption said, "New buddy," with a wink. I didn't like it, but I left and went home. When I walked in, my wife was sitting on the couch, her phone in her hand. She held it up, showing the selfie, and asked who the woman was. I explained it was a stranger from the bar who took it without my permission. I said I'd told her I was married and didn't know her name. My wife shook her head, said I was lying, that I'd been caught cheating. I repeated the story, kept calm, but she stood up, went to the bedroom, and started packing a suitcase. She threw in shirts, jeans, shoes, said she couldn't trust me anymore. I followed her, asked her to stay and talk, but she zipped the bag and headed for the door. She said she was going to her mother's house and left. I stood there, watching her car pull away, wondering how a photo turned into this. Lately, she'd been angry with me. For weeks, she'd snap about how I ate, how I breathed. Everything I did was wrong. She'd stopped sleeping in our bed, crashing on the couch, saying she needed space. I'd ask what was going on, but she'd brush me off. Now she was gone, and I didn't know why she'd flipped so fast. After my wife left, I sat in the living room, staring at the empty couch. The selfie was just a dumb moment, a pushy stranger, but she'd turned it into a betrayal. I tried calling her, but it went to voicemail. I texted, asking her to call me back, but she didn't reply. I kept thinking about her face when she showed me the photo, angry, but almost satisfied. It didn't make sense. She'd been pulling away for weeks, and now she was gone over this. I thought about her mother. She's never liked me, 6 years married, and she's always said I wasn't good enough for her daughter. She'd visit, give me dirty looks, tell my wife I was lazy. Lately, she'd been around more, talking to my wife in low voices when they thought I couldn't hear. I'd overheard them once, arguing about money. My wife said I was selfish because the house and car were in my name. I bought the house before we met, paid off the car myself, she knew that. She'd pushed to add her name, but I'd said no. She'd gotten mad, and her mother had backed her up. I started wondering if this was more than a fight. Her mother's dislike, my wife's distance, it was building to something. She'd been sleeping on the couch, avoiding me, picking fights. The photo was convenient, too convenient. Maybe they were looking for a way to get rid of me. Calling me a cheater could be their excuse. I didn't know what they were after yet, but my gut said it was bad. I decided to go to her mother's house the next day. I had to talk to her, see if I could fix this. I didn't want to lose everything over a lie. The next day, I drove to my mother-in-law's house. My wife's car was parked out front. I knocked, and her mother opened the door. She stood there, arms crossed, glaring like always. She asked what I wanted. I said I needed to see my wife. She told me to get lost, but my wife appeared behind her. Her face was set, no sign of softening. I asked her to come home and talk about the photo. I said it was a stranger, Lisa, who took it without my okay, that I hadn't cheated. She cut me off, said she didn't believe a word. She called me a traitor, said I'd been sneaking around for months. I asked where she got that idea. She wouldn't say. Her mother jumped in, said I'd hurt her daughter too many times, that I was a liar who'd never been good for her. She told me my wife deserved better, and I'd be facing a divorce soon. I said I hadn't done anything wrong, but my wife yelled the photo was proof I cheated. She said she was done with me. Her mother added they'd make sure I paid for it. I asked what she meant, but she smirked and said I'd find out soon enough. My wife nodded, standing close to her. I saw they were a team, united against me. I turned and drove home, their words stuck in my head. Divorce was bad enough, but pay sounded bigger. I thought about my property, the house I'd owned for years, the car I'd paid off. My wife had wanted them in her name for a while. Now they were calling me a cheater to take it all. It felt like a setup, and they were in it together. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, running it all through my head. My wife's reaction, her mother's threats, it wasn't random. They'd jumped on the cheating idea too fast, like they'd been waiting for it. I thought about how she'd been lately. Angry, distant, sleeping on the couch. She'd complained for months about my property, saying it wasn't fair I owned the house and car alone. Her mother had always said I didn't deserve them. I started piecing it together. She'd been pulling away, picking fights, acting like I was the problem. Her mother had been over more, whispering, planning. The photo was their chance, something they could twist into proof. My wife had mentioned meeting a friend a few weeks back, someone she saw a lot. I hadn't asked who then, but now it hit me. It could be a boyfriend. She wasn't just leaving me. She wanted to start over with him. Her mother was helping, pushing her to take my stuff. Calling me a cheater was their way to make it legal, to get the house and car and a divorce. I couldn't sleep that night. It all fit. Her distance, her mother's hate, the threats. They wanted to ruin me, leave me with nothing while she moved on. I pictured them in my house, him driving my car, living off what I'd worked for. They were building this story to make it happen, and I didn't know how to fight it yet. I decided to meet my friends again soon. I needed to get out, clear my head, figure out what they were planning next. They were serious, and I was starting to see how far they'd go. The next few days, I stayed home, waiting for my wife to reach out. She didn't call, didn't text. I tried messaging her, asking why she was so sure I'd cheated, but she ignored me. Her silence made it worse. I knew she was with her mother, working on something. Their threat about making me pay kept replaying in my head. It wasn't just words, they meant it. I thought about my property again. The house was mine before we got together, 3 bedrooms, a big yard. The car was a truck I'd paid off 2 years ago. My wife had pushed hard to get her name on both, saying it was unfair I controlled everything. I'd said no, that they were mine, and she'd stormed off. Her mother had been around more lately, always taking her side, saying I was selfish. Now they were calling me a cheater, and I saw why. They wanted it all. She wasn't just mad. She was setting me up to take what was mine. That friend she'd mentioned kept coming back to me. She'd said it casually, meeting someone new, but it was too much now. It had to be a boyfriend. She'd been distant for weeks, always on her phone, avoiding me. Her mother was in on it, helping her plan this. They'd used the cheating story to get the house and car, and he'd move in with her. I didn't have proof, just their behavior and those threats. I decided to meet my friends at a different bar soon. I needed to think, get out of the house. They were moving forward, and I had to figure out what was coming. I couldn't stop thinking about it. My wife was gone, her mother's words echoing, making me pay. They were after my property. The house was mine from before, a place I'd fixed up myself. The car was my truck, paid off, reliable. She'd wanted them in her name for years, said I was keeping her out. I'd refused, and she'd gotten bitter. Her mother had fueled it, saying I didn't deserve her daughter or what I had. She'd been different lately, sleeping on the couch, snapping at me, barely talking. She'd started fights over nothing, like how I ate or sat. I'd asked what was wrong, but she'd shut me down. Now I saw it. She was pulling away on purpose. That friend she'd mentioned, meeting him weeks ago, was the key. She'd been on her phone more, smiling at texts I didn't see. It was a boyfriend, and she was ready to leave me for him. Her mother was helping, turning me into a cheater to justify it. They'd take my house, my truck, everything, and start over together. I drove around town, passing the house. It was still mine, but I knew she wanted it. Her mother had always pushed her to get more from me, and this was their shot. They were confident, acting like they'd already won. I didn't know how they'd prove I'd cheated, but they were set on it. I decided to meet my friends at a different bar the next day. I needed a break, a chance to think. They were closing in, and I was still trying to catch up, figure out how to stop them. I stayed restless, waiting for something from my wife. She didn't call, didn't text, just silence. I knew she was with her mother, plotting. Their threat about paying wasn't empty, they were serious. My property was the target. The house was mine before her, a solid place I'd made my own. The truck was mine too, paid off, parked out front. She'd argued for months to own half, said I was unfair keeping it all. I'd held firm, and she'd turned cold. She'd been distant long before she left, sleeping apart, picking fights, ignoring me. She'd stopped caring, always on her phone, texting someone. That friend she'd mentioned was no friend, it was a boyfriend. She'd been meeting him, planning this with her mother. They'd call me a cheater, use it to get the house and truck in a divorce. Her mother hated me enough to make it happen, always saying I wasn't good enough. They wanted me out, him in, living off what I'd built. I pictured it, her and this guy in my house, driving my truck, while I got nothing. They'd turned her anger into a weapon, and I didn't know how they'd prove it yet. I had no proof they were lying, just their actions and words. My wife had checked out months ago, and her mother had paved the way. I decided to meet my friends at a different bar the next day. I couldn't stay cooped up, letting it eat at me. They were ready to take everything, and I had to think of something before they did. I went to a different bar with my friends. We took a table near the front, ordered drinks. I glanced across the room and saw my wife sitting with Lisa, the selfie woman. They were laughing, glasses in front of them. I recognized her dark hair from that first night. I stood up, walked over, and asked my wife what she was doing with her. She stopped laughing, looked at me hard. Lisa got up, started yelling. She said I was a terrible person who'd ruined her life, a cheater who didn't deserve my wife. She brought up her new boyfriend, said he was better than me in every way. My wife nodded, her face steady. I asked how she knew Lisa, what was going on. She said it didn't matter, told me to leave. Lisa kept shouting, said I'd lied to everyone, that she had proof I'd cheated. I asked what proof, she wouldn't answer. My wife stood, grabbed her purse, said she was filing for divorce and I should stay away. They walked out together, leaving me standing there. People stared, whispering. I saw it clear. They'd used Lisa to frame me. My wife and her mother had planned it, calling me a cheater to take my property. The house, the truck, they wanted it all for her and this boyfriend. It was a setup, public and loud, and I didn't know if I could fight it. They'd made their move, and it wasn't over yet.